I'm Reverend Robin Tanner. I serve as one of the partners in Launchpad, a consulting firm powering progressive faith communities. Today we're going to take a look at the math of multi-site ministry. Now, maybe you've heard about multi-site ministry and the movement to expand the presence for progressive faith communities. Sometimes multi-site ministry looks like shared ministry between two existing faith communities. Perhaps they're sharing religious education ministry or maybe a social justice and outreach program. It could mean one central location that has created several new satellites, maybe not even in the same geographic area, but connected to that one central location. Sometimes multi-site ministry looks like the merger of two historic communities or two partner communities that are working together that are likely in the same geographic area. Sometimes it means coffeehouse communities, so a ministry that is beyond the walls of what we would traditionally think about as a faith community setting. And it could be beyond brick and mortar entirely, maybe an online ministry. The overall focus in multi-site ministry is to power progressive faith communities in a sustainable way that reaches out beyond the ways of how we once did things and builds on the strength of what we have learned. Now, you may hear multi-site ministry and hear, cha-ching, it's going to cost me more money if I want to expand. If our community wants to be doing all kinds of outreach, that sounds like a lot of work, and we're already stretching our volunteer load. How am I going to possibly find the time? Well, let's take a look at just one hypothetical congregation and look at their worship, for example, before multi-site and after multi-site, and see how multi-site ministry really can be a more sustainable option. So let's look at a standalone community, say one with 150 members, one full-time minister, a half-time director of religious education, a quarter-time administrator, a quarter-time music director, a janitorial contract, as well as 2 hourly childcare providers that are present for their once-a-week Sunday service. Now we're going to take a look at Dawn, the minister of this congregation. Currently, before being a multi-site community, Dawn leads worship 3 times a month. Now, by lead worship, I mean she creates worship 3 times a month. However, when you take out her vacation and study leave, it looks more like 32 Sundays a year. The congregation puts $1,500 in their annual budget for guest speakers and still needs at least 12 guest speakers each year, including lay leaders who are going to lead a worship service from scratch. Now with multi-site worship, let's look at Dawn again. 150 members, and let's say they have a new satellite of 20 members. After you take out rent and operational costs are removed, and you account for the new pledges from those 20 members at a below the national average giving level, you could still create a conservative estimate of about a $5,000 budget for worship. Dawn would be leading worship 3 to 4 times a month, but she's going to be creating less worship. The $1,500 for guest speakers budget that existed already in the budget can be combined with the $5,000 to create $6,500 that the congregation can either use to increase staff, to subscribe to Faith Rocket, which is our theme-based worship materials through Launchpad, and to think creatively about how to sustain their outreach and the overall ministry of their congregation. Let's look at a worship schedule after multi-site. So congregation site number 1, on that first Sunday, Dawn's going to lead what we call worship service A. And at congregation site number 2, they're going to use a Faith Rocket Sunday, which has a complete worship script as well as a video sermon included. On the second Sunday, Dawn leads worship service B that she has created. And there's a video at congregation site number 2 of Dawn leading worship service A. The third Sunday is a new staff Sunday, which is part of that $6,500 budget. And then on that third Sunday, Dawn is going to take the service that she just did the week prior at site number 1 and lead it once more now at congregation site number 2. The last Sunday would be a Faith Rocket Sunday with a worship associate at site number 1. And then that same staff person who was at congregation site number 1 the week prior would now take the entire service that had been completed for the third Sunday at site number 1 and bring it for the fourth Sunday to site number 2. You'll notice in this hypothetical month, Dawn is creating 2 worship services, even though she is leading 3 times. So her overall workload has decreased. The next month at congregation site number 1, Dawn would again lead worship, service A on that first Sunday, and the first Sunday at congregation site number 2 would be a Faith Rocket Sunday. The second Sunday, Dawn would lead worship service B. There'd be a video of Dawn leading worship service A. Now on the third Sunday, Dawn could lead the worship with a second Faith Rocket Sunday script. We provide more than one script with more than one video sermon. Now, Dawn could decide to lead that sermon, or they could utilize the video with Dawn creating and crafting the rest of the service from an already prepared script. At congregation site number 2, there'd be a video of Dawn leading worship service B. And then finally on the fourth Sunday, it'd be a Faith Rocket Sunday at congregation site number 1. Congregation site number 2, Dawn leads worship with the second Faith Rocket Sunday script. She's basically recreating what she's done the Sunday prior at congregation site number 1. Now, with this schedule, Dawn does lead 4 Sundays. But once again, she's only creating 2 worship services for a 4-Sunday month. So a quick comparison. With worship before multi-site, Dawn had to create and lead 3 services per month. Now, after multi-site, one month Dawn creates 2 services. The next month, she might create 3. Before, you had 14 lay-led services created by lay leaders from scratch. After, you have 24 services led from a created script, though, which reduces volunteer burnout, as well as video sermons available to you, so that lay leaders don't have to lead the sermon portion at all. Before, there was no room in the budget for extra staff. In fact, you were pretty strapped on that guest speaker budget of $1,500. After, you can add a quarter-time staff person, or you could increase a current role to create a new worship, for example, a monthly music Sunday. Want to learn more? Check out Launchpad